She's a foster mom of a little 6-year-old girl who was born via gestational surrogate. This little girl, 6 years old, she still has the gestational surrogate only as the only person listed on her birth certificate as her birth mom. And she's in limbo. And she's with this foster care parent now for 2 years who desperately want to adopt this little girl. And I think, who is advocating?
Hi there, this is Miriam Diallo, Applog's Communications Manager, and before we jump into this episode with host Dr. Christina Francis and Jennifer Lahl of the Center for Bioethics and Culture, I just wanted to quickly jump in and let you guys know that this is going to be part one of a two-part episode. We didn't originally intend for it to be, but Jennifer and Dr. Francis had such a good conversation that we had enough video time for 2 episodes, so we decided to just split the conversation in half, publish this half this week. We'll publish the next half next week. So let's jump in, and I hope you guys enjoy.
Welcome to Caring for Both, a curbside consult series by the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists, or APLOG. On this podcast, we bring experts to provide insights to support you as a medical professional in your life-affirming practice and career. I'm your host for today, Dr. Christina Francis, board-certified OBGYN and also CEO of APLOG. And today I'm so excited to be speaking with Jennifer Lahl. Jennifer is the founder of the Center for Bioethics and Culture, which addresses bioethical issues that most profoundly affect our humanity, especially issues that arise in the lives of the most vulnerable amongst us. Jennifer brings her 25 years of experience as a pediatric critical care nurse to her advocacy work on these issues, which she has tackled through her writing, news interviews, speaking engagements, and more. Including, actually, Jennifer and I were just talking about this offline, speaking at APLOG's conference several years ago. So we're so glad to have her back. She's also the producer of several documentaries, including most recently the 2024 film, The Lost Boys, In Search of Manhood, as well as Breeders, a subclass of women, the third movie in a trilogy on third-party reproduction. Breeders discusses surrogacy, which is what we're going to be talking about today, but I definitely would encourage you all to go and watch that entire series because it is very, very informative. So Jennifer, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be with you.
Absolutely. Well, let's get started by just having you tell us a little bit about your background. I think probably many people are wondering, how does a pediatric critical care nurse go from doing that to doing what you're doing? And give us some information about the Center for Bioethics and Culture.
Sure. Yeah, I was just happy working in nursing. My last real job was working at Children's Hospital in Oakland. I was there for 10 years. And I heard about this discipline called bioethics. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting. And I was already seeing medical ethics things in my work that were causing me a little bit of angst and concern. You know, the whole just because we can, should we do things, especially when you're working with a pediatric population. And I'm very pro-medicine, I'm very pro-technology and innovation and research and cures and all that. But I decided to pursue my graduate degree in bioethics. And when I was in graduate school, I made the decision not to return back to clinical nursing, but to found the nonprofit because I thought there were so many issues coming in, especially in the space of assisted reproductive technologies, that people weren't even aware of or considering, or maybe even thinking there might be a problem with some of these technologies. So way back in graduate school, as my thesis project, I founded the nonprofit, which is what I've been doing for the last 25 years. I'm old.
Oh, no, that's so amazing. Well, and I can imagine that in pediatric critical care, you did intersect with some very ethically difficult situations, like many of our listeners, whether they are midwives or OBGYNs, we deal with ethically tricky situations every day, I think, in our practices. And while many of them, I think, are immediately visible as a potentially tricky ethical issue, there are some that I think fly under the radar quite a bit that actually are significant in how we need to think about them from an ethical standpoint. And, I think gestational surrogacy is one of those things. I know, as I'm sure you do as well, personally, women who have served as gestational surrogates for other families, and see it, and as did I for a long time, as just such a wonderful and selfless thing to do, to be able to help a family bring a child into the world. And of course, we love and cherish every child, and want to encourage motherhood and parenthood, in everyone who could possibly do that. But it doesn't mean, as you said, just because we can do it or just because it's possible, it doesn't necessarily mean that we should always. And so that's why I really wanted us to talk about the surrogacy issue, because I think it is something that many people, even in the field of women's health care, haven't actually really taken time to think very deeply about, beyond just oh, that's such a wonderful thing to do, to, help a family bring a child into the world. So can you tell us a little bit, what motivated you to tackle the issue of surrogacy in the first place in your film Breeders? And then can you tell us more about sort of the high level aspects of surrogacy that you cover in that film?
My first film was actually a film called Eggsploitation, which addressed the issue of young girls in the United States being recruited to sell their eggs. And that was at the height of the George Bush presidency, where we were having this huge human cloning embryonic stem cell research. And it was in that context of what was going on politically in that debate about stem cell research and human cloning that I started looking into how is it that we came to have then 500,000 frozen embryos in the US. Now we have over 1 million. And so it was then that I started writing and speaking about the risks of young women who are superovulated and OHSS, and all the risks of these high powerful fertility drugs on young healthy women and who have no medical need to do all of this except for the money. And when I started writing and speaking, all these women contacted me. And so then I made the decision, never never made a movie. People said, how did you learn to make movies? I said, well, I watch movies. It's like doing a TNA, watch one, do one, watch a movie, make a movie. And that film actually won Best Documentary in the California Independent Film Festival, which I was pretty surprised because we made the film in a weekend um, with no money. And then when that film was released, it really made a big noise. And I had what I call big fertility really angry at me. The fertility industry, SART, ASRM, the lobbyists, Resolve, all those people were just mad at me for daring to say that there might be risks and harms. I quickly was contacted by all the donor conceived people who are here because of anonymous sperm donation. And I made Anonymous Father's Day. All these films are free on our YouTube channel, so I'm not trying to sell anything. And then that led me into the trilogy. Well, we have to complete the whole third party conception ethical debate by talking about surrogacy. And I made Breeders, a subclass of women, and then I followed that with also a film called Big Fertility. And I think both films together are really important to watch because Breeders is focused on US women just being surrogates here for people in America, while Big Fertility is US being surrogate for international couples and the whole reproductive tourism angle of trading and buying and shipping babies all over the world. So, and then the high level, again, and I'm very sympathetic to people who can't have children. I'm very sympathetic to the infertile people who desperately long to have children. I'm not just a mean person that doesn't want people to have babies, but I'm very sympathetic to also young women, young mothers who are putting their health at risk. And what most people think is, yes, pregnancy has risks. We all take those risks. That's just a normal part of pregnancy. And the research is plentiful, and my colleague and I have even done our own peer-reviewed research. Fertility and Sterility has a great article out on research piece on the risks of gestational surrogate pregnancies. And Dr. Alan Merritt down at Loma Linda has also published his own research about gestational surrogacy at their academic medical institution at Loma Linda on the risk. And so we have now seen in the medical research, my own and others, that a gestational, not a traditional surrogate, and I put traditional in quotes, where the surrogate is using her own egg, but the gestational surrogate, there are much higher pregnancy risks because she's she's pregnant with a foreign embryo. And her body immediately has some kind of immunoresponse to, this is not my baby. It's like if you just put in a liver in somebody as a liver transplant, you don't do all the matching and the anti-rejection, all those kinds of things. Also, surrogates, oftentimes carry multiples, which, compounds on those risks. But just even a singleton surrogate pregnancy is high rates of preeclampsia, as documented in the stories of the women that I interview for the films. Maternal, gestational diabetes, preterm birth, low-term birth weight babies, high-risk pregnancies. Merit's study at Loma Linda talks about these women, have to be in high-risk pregnancy centers for weeks before delivery, and then the baby goes on, for weeks in the NICU. So, high cost to these pregnancies as well. While big fertility is getting rich, and we've had surrogate deaths. We've had 2 surrogate deaths in California. Michelle Reeves was, a very prominent surrogate mother. She was doing her second surrogacy for the same couple. She had a baby for them. They came back to Michelle and said, "We'd like a sibling. Would you have another baby for us?" And she happily agreed to do that. And in delivery, she died of an amniotic embolism. The baby fortunately lived, but Michelle died. And so here's this couple who have 2 children now, and they look at their children and know that Michelle lost her life to give them the gift of life. Michelle's children lost their mother. Michelle's husband lost his wife, and he's not very happy. And there's countless other women in the US I could talk about where their cases. And oftentimes it's sad, we don't hear it reported in the news. We hear it because there's a GoFundMe that's set up. People trying to raise money for this poor surrogate mother that was being an angel, and now her family is left, with bills. And let's be real, wealthy women are not being surrogates. The number one target of a gestational surrogate in the US is military wives. And my son serves in the US Navy, and the marketing is very slick, and military wives are already oriented to service. Their husbands are serving their country, they serve God, they serve their country, and they're low income, and they're unemployable or underemployable because they move a lot, and so it's really hard for them. And they often have little children, and it looks really good to be able to make $40,000 or $50,000 as a stay-at-home mom taking care of your children while you're helping somebody. So that was maybe a little bit too much.
No, I think, because these are the aspects of it that I think oftentimes people don't consider. And it's, certainly there, as you said, there are risks associated with any kind of pregnancy. There are many benefits associated with pregnancy as well. But, one of APLOG's sort of pillars of what we stand for is that we believe that women deserve fully informed consent about their health care. And I do wonder how many women who are being gestational surrogates are being fully apprised of all of these risks that they're taking. And certainly, especially those gestational surrogates that are coming from a low socioeconomic background, or they're doing this almost out of desperation, as you said, financial desperation, wanting to help and do something good, certainly. But, also that amount of money, I would imagine, would be very coercive in some ways of taking risks that you might not otherwise take. The film Breeders pinpoint certainly some of the ethically complicated situations that you've just talked about that can arise, but also the medical complications for the surrogate and for the baby. We've talked a little bit about that. I wonder if you have maybe a story or two that really sticks out to you, either from the film or just from women that you've had conversations about. And has anyone said anything to you in the process of your research in this about being surprised by those risks, or what kind of consent they were given before this process started?
Yeah, I can definitely speak to those questions, but first I want to just sort of back up and comment about something you said about being informed. I want to start the conversation even further back by asking the question, an egg donor and or a surrogate, they're not patients. So they have no medical reason, even if they're informed, to assume medical risks. I mean, it's different if you're an infertile woman and you're offering, you're informed of the risk of IVF and assisted reproductive technologies, and you're doing this for yourself because you are infertile. You have a medical need, you could argue. And these women, they don't have any medical need. And as you say, their need is financial. And we know that if you remove the money, women are overwhelmingly not going to sell their eggs and they're not going to serve as surrogates. Yes, there'll be a few that will altruistically do it to help a sister or help a girlfriend, but overwhelmingly women will full stop not do this if not for the money, even though they say they're doing it to help. And so I want to say, why are medical doctors informing women of medical risks that they have no reason to even take? So back it up back there. Since they're not patients, if you're talking about the patient, yes, I can get on board with informed consent. Now, as far as stories, I could spend probably the next month telling stories. And I'm going to tell probably one of the most recent ones I've heard that's not in my films, because it is the most egregious example of surrogacy gone wrong. I was contacted by a woman who's a foster mother for a 6-year-old girl. I have to be very careful not to give any identifying, but she's a foster mom of a little 6-year-old girl who was born via gestational surrogate, and the gestational surrogate was an illegal immigrant living in a shelter for women's shelter because she was so poor. The surrogacy was brokered by 2 women who are in their 70s. You have to ask yourself, what are 70-year-old women doing brokering surrogacy arrangements? This little girl, 6 years old, she still has the gestational surrogate only as the only person listed on her birth certificate as her birth mom, and she's in limbo. And one of the 70-year-old women who runs a daycare wants to adopt this little girl because for many years after her birth, she lived with her. She lived with this 70-year-old woman, and she was removed from her care by a judge because of things that were not going right with the judge, like red flags. And she's with this foster care parent now for 2 years who desperately want to adopt this little girl. And I think, who is advocating? And this all happened in a state at the time where all surrogacy, commercial gestational surrogacy, was illegal. So there's so many bad actors. Fertility and Sterility actually published a paper last year that showed the #1 foreign people that come to the US to hire gestational surrogates are Asian men in their late 40s. Why are single old Asian men coming to the US to broker babies? This causes me sleepless nights because I can, think of all kinds of bad scenarios of what is happening to these babies. Are they sold on the black market? Are they going into pedophile child pornography rings? God only knows. And so now in my films, we don't have those kinds of stories. We have mostly women who had serious health complication that were treated treated like paid breeders. You work for me, you will do what I say you do, and all the machinations of the depravity of people. And it's truly a baby market. It truly is.
Jennifer, first of all, that story that you just told of that poor little 6-year-old girl is heartbreaking. And you're right that things like that and um, older men coming over that are single coming over and brokering the sale. I mean, this is what this is, right? It's the sale of little children. Should keep all of us up at night. And it brings to mind, I'm sure you're aware of the work that Katie Faust's organization, Them Before Us, is doing, which very much is in line with the work that you have been doing of, who is thinking of the rights of these children and the effects that this has on these children. And as well as, I would argue the sort of secondary victims in this as well are women that are being exploited, many of whom, as you brought up, are in other countries. That's one thing that's been very concerning to me to hear. And I think this came to the forefront when the war in Ukraine broke out, right? Because they were talking about all of the gestational surrogates that were kind of stuck for medical care then. So we're getting women pregnant through the surrogacy process in a way that we know puts them at higher risk than say your general pregnancy would. And then oftentimes we're doing this in other countries where they may not have access to the same kind of healthcare resources, even that we have in this country for women that are able to access it in this country. But if they, let's say they're in Ukraine or in Southeast Asia somewhere and they experience these complications, that is putting them at tremendous risk, exploiting them, as I know you go into in your film. Um, for the whims really of wealthy people and mostly in the West. And you know, whose desires and needs are served in this whole scenario? It's the adults that want a child. And again, I think, and thank you for emphasizing this when we started, that this is in no way minimizing the pain that many women and families suffer when they are unable to have children. That is a very, very deep pain. And so this is in no way minimizing that, but we can't, especially in scenarios like this, we can't ignore the needs and what's happening to the women that are serving as surrogates and the children that are produced as a result of this as well. And you know, these are all things that need to play into this conversation that I think aren't many times when we're discussing the issue of surrogacy.
Yeah, and you know, you guys are overwhelmingly focused as obstetricians and gynecologists. And our own research that Callie Fell and I did showed that gestational surrogates have report higher rates of postpartum depression than compared to their pregnancies when they come home with their own baby, which just naturally makes sense. You know, you've carried this baby for 9 months, you bonded, even though the agencies, Big Fertility, encourage you not to bond. It's not your baby, you're just the babysitter, you're just the easy bake oven. But you know, they do bond and they come home with empty arms. They come home with breasts, you know, ready to nurse a baby and all those things. And it's quite tragic that nobody is thinking about those children. And you know, this one little, you know, particular little 6-year-old girl, my heart just breaks for her. And what will be the psychological harm and the trauma for her when she's finally old enough to even learn about how she came to be in this world. And you know, and back to in Big Fertility, Kelly Martinez, the gestational surrogate, her last surrogate was for a couple in Spain. Most of Europe, all surrogacy is illegal. And Prime Minister Meloni just recently in Italy closed their loophole so Italians can no longer travel outside of Italy because we have all this tourism. You know, people in France and Spain come here because they can't do it in their country, but Meloni solved that, and we are like, yay. But Kelly was pregnant for a couple in Spain. They wanted twins and they wanted a boy and a girl. So they did genetic, you know, screening of the embryos and implanted the boy and the girl. And what happened was she miscarried the little girl embryo and the boy embryo split. So they found out during the pregnancy that she was now pregnant for, you know, with twin boys. And the couple in Spain was mad because they paid extra. They wanted a boy and a girl. They didn't want two boys. Da, 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 da. And they put all kinds of pressure on Kelly's OB/GYN doctor, who in the film he talks about being conflicted. Who's my patient here? Who do I advocate for? Because we have the people that are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars. And he even says on camera, I can't imagine somebody paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for babies they don't want. You know, and he as a doctor was very conflicted and in this particular pregnancy of Kelly, she had very, very high preeclampsia. She like almost died and had to have, you know, emergency C-section to deliver these twins because her doctor said, somebody's not going to live. Either all of you or some of you, we've got to deliver these babies now. And, you know, those babies they flew from Spain to South Dakota. They took those babies back. Kelly doesn't know, did they keep the little boys? Did they keep one little boy? You know, what became of these little boys? And they didn't pay any of her hospital bills. So she reached out to me because she had the collectors coming after her because she had about $11,000 worth of unpaid medical bills. And she was a high school dropout. You know, she didn't have that kind of money. She worked at Sonic. You know, she cleaned houses.
Gosh, I mean, the more that you learn about this, and I hope that this is informative for people who are listening, because again, I think There are probably so many out there who just are completely unaware that this kind of thing is going on.
Hi there, it's Miriam again. I hope you guys enjoyed part 1 of this conversation, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week for part 2.